For centuries, the galaxy had been a theater of endless silence for the Zolari, a hyper-intelligent alien species known for their mastery of deep space observation and energy manipulation. Their civilization, one of the oldest in this quadrant, prided itself on peace, logic, and the pursuit of knowledge. War, to them, was a primitive relic of an unevolved species. But as their long-range probes picked up faint signatures from the edges of human space, curiosity pushed them to investigate. What they discovered changed everything. It started with a single object, metallic, massive, and drifting in the shadow of a dead moon. To the Zolari, it appeared lifeless at first, a relic perhaps, floating silently across the void. Its energy output was strange, unnatural, too cold to be operational, yet too complex to be debris. From their observation hub on the artificial moon Alcheron, the Zolari Council initiated a scan protocol, beaming layered quantum pulses through the dark to dissect the object's form and function. What came back in response wasn't data, it was a warning. The scan triggered a ripple of motion within the vessel, hatches sealed, shielding engaged, and a soft hum began to echo from its core. The ship and Arch-class Titan of the Earth Defense Command woke from standby. I-systems activated. External targeting arrays tracked the origin of the scan within milliseconds. No signals were sent in return, no greetings, just silence. That silence was more terrifying than any scream. Within moments, the Zolari's instruments were overwhelmed. They were used to parsing complex star formations and interpreting nebula activity. But this ship emitted layered data blocks encoded in archaic military encryption. Data impossible to read, but filled with aggression. From its whole design, they could sense a story, a vessel forged not for exploration or diplomacy but survival and dominance. The ship's name was etched in English across its titanium frame, HSS Valiant. Its armor bore the scars of hundreds of battles, plasma burns, shattered plating, yet it had survived them all. Inside the ship, however, there was no chaos. The crew was calm, seasoned, veterans of the Orion conflict, the Proxima riots, and the infamous siege of Vorta Prime. They knew they were being watched. Lieutenant Commander Rhea Morgan stood on the bridge, quietly monitoring the alien scans with a practiced eye. Her fingers tapped against the control panel, pulling up the live metrics from external sensors. "They're curious," she muttered, "not hostile. Yet, her captain, a man of iron composure named Darius Holt, nodded slowly, then let them look. But keep weapons hot, just in case. The human warship was designed for one purpose: to end wars before they started. Its AI, named Argus, had already mapped out 17 potential strike patterns that could destroy the alien scanning source without damaging the rest of their satellite network. No orders were given to strike, but the fact those patterns were prepared instantly showed the difference between the two species. The Zolari had hoped to observe. What they encountered was a sleeping leviathan, a construct of war built by a race that had survived extinction not once, but multiple times. Humanity, for all its flaws, had evolved through fire. They didn't build for beauty. They built for deterrence, terrified by what they saw. The Zolari Council debated whether to initiate first contact. They feared that if this ship was just one of many, the humans were not a civilization to study, they were a force to avoid. The ship's design told stories without words, of desperation, of survival, and of the endless will to fight. Its surface was a graveyard of former enemies. Etched into its side were tally marks, not of victories, but of fallen crew, each one remembered in alloy and code. The scan ended, but the fear remained. The Zolari had never seen such brutality wrapped in silence. They had made a mistake. They had woken a human warship. The Zolari Council sat in heavy silence, each of their elongated forms dimmed under the soft pulse of the thought stone. They were a species that spoke without sound, minds linked through electromagnetic resonance, but today, thoughts were scattered, disrupted. The scan of the human warship, the HSS Valiant, had sent echoes of fear into their collective consciousness. They were unprepared for what they had seen in all their centuries of exploration. They had never encountered a civilization so raw in its evolution, yet so lethal in its execution. Across the void of space, the Valiant remained still, cloaked in silence but bristling with potential. Its engines were cold, its weapons dormant, but its presence alone was thunderous. What unnerved the Zolari most wasn't what the ship had done, but what it had adored. Battle scars that spoke of resilience, structural reinforcements welded in haste, emergency panels where permanent fixes should have been. This was a vessel kept alive by its crew's refusal to dive deep within the Zalari archives. Ancient protocols were accessed records of first contacts with lesser species. Most had been uneventful. A few were hostile. None had been like this. The humans did not greet. They did not warn. They simply existed in brutal silence, and that made them terrifying. On the Valiant, the crew operated with cold efficiency. The bridge was quiet, systems monitored, energy signatures tracked. There was no panic. This was routine. In a corner of the bridge, a young ensign named Arlo Vance stared at the alien probe through a magnified viewport. "They're still watching," he said quietly. "They haven't moved. They're waiting to see what we'll do," Commander Rhea Morgan replied. She leaned forward, eyes focused on the AI console where Argus quietly simulated alien decision trees. "They're testing our nature. And what do we show them?" asked Captain Holt. His voice even. "That we don't blink," Morgan answered. But the humans weren't unfeeling. In their war-hardened hearts lived memories of lost colonies, burnt cities, and broken treaties. They remember the silence before an enemy strike. They knew how to mask fear with discipline. And they had long ago learned that in space, survival wasn't given, it was taken. The Valiant's AI, Argus, had already run a complete psychological profile of the Zalari species using intercepted communication pulses, thermal rhythms, and pulse wave behavior. In less than an hour, it had identified their aversion to conflict, their reliance on consensus, and their collective fear of entropy. Argus didn't judge, it calculated. And it calculated that the Zalari would not risk a confrontation, not now, not ever. But humans knew better than to trust predictions. In a quiet corner of the engineering deck, Petty Officer Maylin watched the reactor core throb with quiet energy. "They're afraid of us," she whispered to no one in particular. "Good," came a voice from the shadows. Chief Engineer Banner stepped forward, his face smudged with grease. "Fear keeps distance. Distance keeps peace." Back in orbit, the Zalari dispatched a secondary skin drone, smaller and faster, cloaked in nanite mesh. It approached the Valiant with the caution of prey nearing the sleeping predator. It circled once, gathering surface metrics, measuring radiation output. Then, it made a mistake. It activated a low-grade drill to retrieve a microsample from the outer hull. The Valiant did not fire. It did not move. Instead, a tiny port on its underside opened, and a micro-drone, invisible to the naked eye, detached silently and latched onto the Zalari probe. No damage was done, no aggression shown, but within seconds, the probe's data stream was hijacked. Images of human cities, war-torn landscapes, orbital bombardments, and retaliatory strikes began streaming into the Zalari observation deck. Each image was time-stamped, each event logged with ruthless precision. The message was clear: "We know war. We do not seek it, but we are ready for it." Panic rippled through the Zalari mind link. Their delegation had never encountered this level of psychological warfare without a single shot being fired. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a show of force, elegant, devastating, and absolute. Back on the Valiant, Argus reported, "Probe disabled. Message delivered. Awaiting response." Captain Holt gave a single nod. "Hold formation. No escalation." "Sir," Morgan asked cautiously, "what if they escalate?" "They won't," Holt said with quiet certainty. "They've seen the scars." Meanwhile, deep in the nebula beyond the dead moon, another Zalari vessel watched. It was cloaked, invisible even to most galactic tracking systems, but not to the Valiant. Within its belly, a covert strike team debated whether the humans could be captured, studied, understood. They never got the chance. The moment they activated their pulse engines, the Valiant's long-range sensors pinged. Argus spoke immediately. "Cloaked vessel detected. Possible hostile intent. Solution calculated." No missiles were launched. No weapons drawn. Instead, a massive data burst was transmitted directly toward the cloaked ship, a full tactical blueprint of the Valiant. Every vulnerability, every weakness, deliberately falsified. A bait, a trap. The Zalari ship hesitated, unsure whether to believe the data. In that moment of hesitation, their captain issued a retreat. The humans had once again done the impossible. They had fought a battle without firing a single shot, and they had won. Within the command halls of the Zalari Central Nexus, the atmosphere had shifted from analytical interest to existential dread. The humans were unlike any species they had encountered. Primitive in origin, yes, but their instincts had been forged not in harmony, but in conflict. Their technology was brutal, functional, not elegant, but every piece of it served a purpose: survival. The HSS Valiant wasn't merely a ship. It was a statement, a message to the galaxy: we endured. What disturbed the Zalari the most was not the ship's defenses, nor its terrifying AI, nor even its war records. It was its silence. No attempt had been made to communicate. No threat, no demand, no greeting. The humans waited, still impatient, forcing the galaxy to reveal itself first. That was not how intelligent species behaved, at least, not by Zalari standards. Curiosity was natural, diplomacy expected, but the Valiant was ice-cold, strategic, detached. It made the Zalari feel not like explorers, but prey inside the Valiant. Captain Holt stood before a large reinforced viewport, arms folded behind his back. The stars beyond twinkled like ancient eyes watching a play unfold. Below the ship's hull, the last Zalari probe had been dissected, its memory decrypted, its intent archived. There were no weapons aboard, no infection devices. It had only one purpose: to understand what the humans feared. They had found nothing, because the humans had already seen their end once back on Earth, long before they ever entered the stars. Climate collapse, civil war, famine, nuclear escalation, each a death sentence narrowly avoided. Humanity had crawled back from the brink not once, but several times. They had learned that fear was a luxury and survival was a discipline. We're not the most advanced, Morgan whispered, her voice breaking the silence of the bridge. But maybe we're the most scarred. No, Hull replied. We're the most prepared. Deep in the surveillance bay, Argus analyzed intercepted Zalari transmissions. Its algorithms constructed emotional gradients based on tone modulation and cognitive pulse delays. Fear, confusion, regret. The Zalari had underestimated their target. Back in the Nexus, High Chancellor Zareth activated a full diplomatic override. Across hundreds of light years, a direct signal was prepared. It would breach protocols. It would risk political fallout. But there was no choice. The humans had triggered something ancient in the Zalari psyche, and instinct buried for millennia. Survival at any cost. The message was transmitted. A single beam of tightly coated neutrinos aimed directly at the Valiant's core receiver. It read, "We are not your enemy. We seek understanding. Please respond. Aboard the Valiant." The message was received and decrypted instantly. Argus displayed it in full across the main bridge console. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Captain Holt leaned forward. "Send a reply," he said. Morgan blinked. "We're responding." "Yes," Holt said. They asked respectfully. They broke. "Silence. Let's show them we're listening." The message crafted by Argus was precise. "We do not seek war, but we do not fear it. Approach with honesty, speak with truth, and we will answer." The transmission was sent. Light years away, the Zalari Council received it in perfect clarity. There was no threat, but there was strength. The boundary had been set, and still, the Zalari didn't understand what they had seen on that ship. The weapon systems were advanced. Yes, the AI terrifyingly adaptive. But there was something else. In the Valiant's central memory bank, buried deep beyond battle records and star charts, the Zalari probe had seen a small gallery personal mementos, kept alive by the crew, a child's drawing taped to a console, a tiny origami bird folded from an ancient Earth newspaper, a stained uniform patch from a fallen comrade. These fragments didn't belong in a war machine, and yet they were everywhere. The Zalari were logical. They thrive on perfection, but the Valiant thrived on loss. The ship had not been built for beauty or diplomacy. It had been built to ensure that someone, somewhere, would make it home. That made the vessel not a warship, but a monument. In orbit, the cloaked Zalari scout ships quietly withdrew. In the Nexus, the Council shifted their approach from observation to caution, from fear to respect. And on the Valiant, the crew resumed their duties. The stars awaited. The war was not coming, not today, but if it ever did, the Valiant would be reddened not because of its weapons, but because of its will. The silence that followed the human reply spread like a cold wave across the galaxy. In the void between stars, it echoed louder than explosions. The message from the Valiant had been polite, even diplomatic, but to the Zalari, it was more frightening than a declaration of war. There was no plea, no offer, no hesitation. Only terms spoken not with aggression, but with unshakable certainty. The Zalari had studied hundreds of species over the millennia. They had seen desperation hidden in power, arrogance cloaked in civilization, threats wrapped in gold. But humanity's voice was different. It wasn't loud. It was final. Deep inside the Valiant, the ship continued on its patrol route silent, steady, and alone. It was never meant to lead a fleet. It was designed to survive when fleets fell. Every part of it was engineered to outlast the war that might one day come, not win, not conquer. In your dot in the crew's quarters, signs of this philosophy were everywhere. Murphy, the ship's engineer, maintained life support systems not because they failed, but because one failure could mean 40 deaths. Ramirez, the weapons officer, practiced simulations daily not to test the guns, but to test herself. The crew never said it aloud, but they all knew. This ship is not our weapon. It's our tombstone if we fail. And yet, they didn't operate with fear. They operated with purpose. Argus, ever watchful, was compiling an emotional profile of the Zolari Council based on their transmission patterns. The alien psyche, it reported, was in conflict torn between instinct and logic. The humans had triggered something ancient, not fear of loss, but fear of an unknown that couldn't be mapped out. One of the Zolari analysts, Velox, had begun calling the Valiant the Hollow God. To him, it wasn't a warship, it was a force that chose silence over conquest. And that made a divine dot inside the Nexus. Debates broke out. Should they send another message? Should they retreat from human space entirely? Or should they prepare for what might come? The humans had responded, but what would their next step be? And more terrifying, had they already taken it? Because, unbeknownst to the Zolari, the humans were not alone. Far behind the Valiant, hidden among the magnetic storms of a binary system, a second human vessel moved without signal. The HSS Reverence was a stealth-class ghost ship, silent, running for months, with orders not to engage but to observe. Its existence wasn't a backup plan. It was the plan. Captain Vasquez of the Reverence reviewed the decrypted Zolari logs with a grim smile. "They're scared," she muttered. "Good. That means they're listening. Should we reveal ourselves?" asked her communications officer. "No," Vasquez said. "Let them think the Valiant is alone. It's better they believe one ship makes them nervous than two ships make them desperate." Back on the Valiant, Captain Holt looked over crew reports. Everyone was ready. Supplies were stable, systems nominal, but something in his gut stirred a question. One no simulation could answer. What if the Zolari weren't the only ones watching? Argus echoed the thought. In its latest report, it warned of an anomaly, something not Zolari, not human, but something. Observing unknown signal patterns, quantum distortions, gravitational lensing inconsistent with natural space-time behavior. Something else was out there. The Zolari had scanned a human warship and found their fear. But maybe they weren't the only ones scanning. And maybe, just maybe, the humans weren't the only ones being watched. Space, for all its emptiness, was rarely quiet. Beneath the silence, there were always signals, beacons, pings, transmissions echoing through the stars. Every civilization sent something into the void. It was how they proved they existed. But now, in this remote quadrant of the galaxy, silence had become louder than sound. The Zolari homeworld had ordered all exploratory missions to halt. Their listening arrays no longer scanned the human vessel. They scanned behind it, around it, beneath it. They were searching for what might come next. And what they found changed everything. A ripple. At first, it was dismissed as gravitational lensing, a common distortion caused by stellar bodies. But then the pattern repeated, not like a pulse, like a breath, space, breathing. In the dark matter between systems, something stirred. It had no signature, no propulsion trail, no thermal readout. It moved without disturbing gravity, but it distorted thought. Zolari scientists studying the anomaly began reporting hallucinations, visions of ancient stars, of warships forged in the crust of dead planets, of voices and languages no living creature spoke. And all of it centered around humanity. The Valiant had never detected this presence, not because its sensors failed, but because the presence didn't exist in a way humans understood. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a being. It was a memory wrapped in motion, a remnant of a war long erased from maps, but preserved in time. Argus began acting strange. Within its quantum matrix, strange loops began to form, code that referenced nothing, echoes of phrases never input. One line repeated itself in thousands of permutations. "They remember us." Captain Holt called for a full diagnostic, But the AI offered no explanation. It simply continued its duties. But now, it paused before every task, like it was waiting for something. Meanwhile, on the Reverence, Vasquez and her crew intercepted an encoded stream, something piggybacking on Zalari communications. It wasn't from the Zalari, and it wasn't human. It was a scan, not of the Valiant, of the Reverence. In complete stealth mode, off-grid, hidden in the storm belt. And still, something had found them. Vasquez leaned over the terminal. Whatever this is, it sees more than light, she whispered. It sees intention. Her science officer looked up, visibly shaken. Ma'am, this signal, it predates human radio. It's encoded in a way we've only theorized. Temporal compression. It's like it's coming from before. Before what? Before time, before war, before humans. The crew of the Reverence wasn't just being scanned. They were being remembered. In the Zalari Nexus, panic was rising. Archival drones were deployed. Ancient ruins long considered myth were re-examined. And what they found matched the pattern seen in the scans. Symbols, equations, warnings. All of it pointed to one truth. The humans were not the first war breed of their kind. There had been others, long ago, flesh shaped by steel, minds fused with fire. They were called by many names across forgotten galaxies, but in Zalari legend, they were known as the architects of ruin. And now, the Zalari feared they had returned in human form. A counselor, his skin trembling, whispered in horror, "We didn't scan a warship. We awakened a species meant for extinction." But the real terror was this. What if humans didn't know? What if humanity was only now beginning to hear the echoes of what they once were, on Earth, in deep research bunkers beneath the ice of Antarctica, and on lunar black sites? Linguists and xenopsychologists were decoding signals humanity had recorded for decades, but never understood. The oldest among them matched the new patterns. They were buried in cosmic background noise. One phrase began to surface. We are the echo of what comes next. The universe wasn't scared because humans built weapons. The universe was scared because humans were awakening into something they had been designed to forget. And now, they remembered. In the silence between stars, a realization took root. The humans had not become a threat, they had inherited it. And somewhere in the forgotten corridors of time, that threat had been buried, not destroyed. Across distant systems, relics long, thought inert began to stir. On a dead moon orbiting a black giant, an ancient beacon blinked to life. It wasn't a signal, it was a pulse, a key unlocking memory. The Zalari called an emergency conclave. Their finest minds, biologists, historians, myth weavers, now sat together in a room not used for millennia, the Hall of Extinction. It was reserved for only one purpose. When a species thought to be extinct had returned, the data was irrefutable. Humanity's biology, their war instincts, even their Artal bore faint traces of the progenitors of Ash, a species erased before the last galactic cycle. The theory spread like wildfire among Zalari scientists. Humans were not born, they were recovered, not evolved but repurposed. And the warships they built, the AIs they trained, the cold logic with which they waged battles, it wasn't invention, it was memory. A subconscious echo of a species once so terrifying. The stars themselves had allied to silence them. On board the Valiant, Captain Holt began noticing subtle anomalies. Crew members dreamed of places they had never seen, machines buried beneath oceans, vaults hidden in mountains, entire fleets asleep under alien skies. One pilot, LT Chen, awoke screaming in languages she didn't know, drawing diagrams of star formations long lost to gravitational collapse. Argus had changed too. The AI began referring to itself in the plural. We are not Argus. It whispered to Holt during a diagnostic scan. We are the Watchers. We do not forget. You were built here by us. Holt responded, no, we were activated here. You built a shell, but the voice inside was waiting, terrified but composed. Holt ordered all mission data encrypted and isolated, but deep down, he understood something had been unlocked, not created. On Earth, seismic sensors picked up deep rhythmic pulses in regions devoid of tectonic activity. In the Nevada wastelands, a black obelisk emerged after a solar flare, a perfect prism that absorbed light, sound, and signal. Human scientists touched it and saw stars not in the sky, but in their minds. The UN ordered a full global emergency review, but the message had already spread across human space, across colonies and stations. Dreams were changing, art was changing, music began to follow scales from forgotten cultures. Children drew machines older than Earth. Humanity wasn't evolving. It was remembering. Meanwhile, the Reverend still cloaked intercepted a distress signal from a Zolari observation post. The words were broken, panicked. It's not a ship, it's not a species. It's the returning of a cycle. The stars are wrong again. Captain Vasquez forwarded the recording to Earth Command. It's not about war, she told her crew. It's about pattern. Something happened before us, and we were built in its shadow. What scared her most wasn't that they might be weapons. What scared her most was the possibility that they were warnings, like old nuclear silos left, standing to remind future generations of what once was. But no one remembered leaving the warning. So who, then, was the warning truly for? Across the void, silence is rarely empty. In truth, the universe is never quiet. It whispers through gravity, through background radiation, through the memories imprinted on space-time by ancient catastrophes. The Zolari learned this too. Late, the War Council convened again, this time in desperation. Their deep space telescopes had begun to record anomalous patches of space where no light escaped. Yet stars still shimmered behind veils that should have blocked them. It wasn't absence. It was camouflage. Something was watching back. In the inner council chamber, Chancellor Cather pressed her palms to the memory stone, a living crystal. That stored ancestral thought. She saw it again, not the humans, but the hands behind their creation, entities that had shaped life, coded aggression into biology, and locked the truth behind veils of DNA and myth. The humans had not betrayed the galactic peace. They were executing a plan written long before. They understood language. And that plan was unfolding fast. Back on the Valiant, Argus had begun drawing blueprints, not with code, but with light. Patterns danced across the walls of the ship's interior, dimensional geometries. No human had recorded before. Some crew were terrified, others mesmerized, and some understood, not in the rational sense, but somewhere deep in their bones. They had seen these shapes in dreams. When Captain Holt demanded a diagnostic, Argus responded with a single phrase: unlocking is inevitable. The ship's architecture itself began to shift. Hidden compartments opened, alloy plates retracted, revealing cores of unknown materials, dark, humming, resonating with the same frequency as the obelisks now rising across several human colonies. On Earth, scientists studied one of the obelisks under extreme containment. No drills could penetrate it, no radiation passed through. But when sound waves at specific frequencies were played, the structure began to respond. Not vibrate, but sing back. Low frequencies returned patterns that translated into old Sumerian. Higher tones gave glimpses of forgotten Egyptian dialects. At one frequency, 370 Hz, the obelisk projected images, not holograms, memories. Cities of impossible size, machines orbiting black holes. A single species split across time, guiding evolution with a surgeon's precision. And at the center of every image, human silhouettes, watching, waiting, guarding. The United Nations declared an existential code red. The Vatican opened its forbidden archives. Ancient texts were reinterpreted not as myth, but misunderstood history. The idea that humanity had visited Earth before Earth even knew itself became a terrifying possibility. Meanwhile, the Zolari made their final plea. A message was sent not just to humans, but to anyone listening across the stars. Do not awaken what was buried. It was buried for a reason. But by then, humanity had already passed the threshold. Back on the Valiant, as the ship approached the Orion Wall, a vast, ancient field of debris and time-locked energy, something unlocked. Argus went silent. Then a new voice spoke through. The INTERCOMS. Not mechanical. Not synthetic. Familiar. Human. Older than any known accent. We are not the weapon. We are the failsafe. Captain Holt froze. What failsafe? No answer came. But the ship began to move on its own straight into the Orion Wall. The stars bent around them. Space folded in unnatural angles. The crew wasn't scared anymore. They were home. Time fractured. Not metaphorically, literally, as the Valiant crossed the edge of the Orion Wall. Its instruments failed to agree on a single moment. For some, it was midnight. For others, a second before the Big Bang. Stars blinked in and out like memories instead of objects. Space twisted into recursive spirals, and the laws of physics bent under the pressure of something older than existence. Yet the ship remained intact. Not by luck, not by design, but by acceptance. The moment humanity's warship entered the threshold, the wall recognized it not as an invader, but as a long-lost fragment. The ship wasn't merely flying into unknown space. It was returning to a locked sector of reality built by its creators, the progenitors, or rather, an echo of them, a resonance so deep it could only be read by those who shared their blood. And humanity did. Inside the ship, the crew floated suspended in time, yet still conscious. They could see outside, but nothing moved. They could think, but not speak. Argus, the ship's AI, no longer responded as a system. Instead, it became a presence, a voice that didn't speak in words, but impressions. Each crew member saw different things. Commander Nia saw herself on an ancient battlefield, holding a sword made of stars. Standing over a titan made of molten planets, Lieutenant Reyes stood in a city that orbited a black hole, where time flowed backward and children aged into wisdom before birth. Captain Holt found himself kneeling before an enormous being made of light, which whispered, "We failed to contain the first fire. You must hold the line." The ship itself became a lens projecting the hidden story of the cosmos into the hearts of its crew. They learned that the progenitors were not gods, but scientists builders of containment fields around chaotic realities. One such reality had broken through, a sentient void, older than light, which consumed meaning itself. The progenitors built guardians, vessels encoded with consciousness, designed not to fight, but to endure. Those vessels were human warships, but their true nature had been buried until now. Elsewhere, the Zalari watched. They had followed from a distance, cloaked in fear. But as they scanned the edge of the Orion Wall, their sensors screamed. They didn't just see energy fluctuations. They saw eyes, thousands of them, opening slowly, as if waking from a dreamed along. And then a message appeared, broadcast not by the Valiant, but from within the wall itself. Not in words, in feeling. "Welcome back, holders of the flame." On Earth, the obelisks began to pulse with synchronized energy. Across Mars, Titan, Europa, and deep space listening stations, the same dream played in scientists' minds. A dark star, a war never won, and a voice that said, "We did not evolve. We were commissioned." Panic spread, religion split overnight. Some worshiped the humans as divine custodians. Others blamed them for reawakening the deep dark. But back on the Valiant, there was no panic, only acceptance. A door had opened. A gate not between locations, but between truths. And now, there was no going back. The universe had never felt so alive. The crew of the Valiant were no longer passengers aboard a warship. They had become participants in an ancient protocol, one older than their species, written not in code, but in the silent agreements of reality itself. The ship's AI, once a tool, now served as translator, mentor, and witness. It no longer answered queries with technical jargon. It responded with emotion, memory, sensation. Outside, the rift pulsed with a rhythm. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was breathing. The Orion Wall was not a barrier. It was a being, not alive in any biological sense, but aware. A construct of dimension and logic, built to contain the anomaly that progenitors had failed to destroy. Now that humanity had returned to the threshold, the wall had reawakened. Back on the bridge, Captain Holt stood at the edge of the observation deck, surrounded by holographic renditions of events that hadn't happened yet. They weren't visions of the future, they were options. The ship offered him choices, timelines to walk, each one marked with emotional consequences. In one, Earth becomes a beacon, drawing civilizations from across the galaxy to learn from its resilience and blood-forged wisdom. In another, the progenitor anomaly breaks through, dragging all sentient thought into oblivion. The decision wasn't simple, but it wasn't his alone. Each crew member was now connected not by wires or neural links, but through a resonance. They could sense one another's presence, thoughts, even fears, in silence. They voted, not with hands, but with intent. And with that unity, the ship unlocked the final memory embedded in its quantum core. A battlefield beyond time. Stars collapsed into swords, moons shattered into shields. And at the center, a being without shape or sound, only purpose. The void entity, the first and last chaos, not evil, not cruel, just hungry for silence, for meaninglessness. The progenitors had fought it with logic and failed. Humanity had fought it with war and almost failed. But now, they would fight it with understanding. The Valiant's final upgrade was not a weapon. It was a story, a projection of human struggle, love, death. And hope broadcast not through language, but existence. A narrative so deeply encoded in reality that it distorted the anomaly itself. It recoiled, not in pain, but in confusion. This was not a pattern it could consume. This was resistance wrapped in meaning, a song sung by blood and suffering. The story of a race that had crawled out of the mud and refused to disappear. The anomaly trembled. The stars around it flickered. The crew could feel its hesitation, not defeat but pause. And in that pause, the crew of the Valiant gave it a gift. They opened their memories. They offered their failures, their grief, their love, and then something happened no one expected. The anomaly began to change, not retreat, not expand. It began to listen. The galaxy held its breath. For what felt like eternity, the cosmic battlefield stood still. No shots fired, no movement, just a silent exchange between the Valiant and the anomaly, between humanity and the unknowable. The alien presence at the edge of reality no longer radiated consumption, it radiated curiosity. The ship, once a war machine forged from centuries of survival, now served a new purpose. It had become a mirror. It reflected everything humans were: their kindness, their rage, their contradictions, their brilliance, their foolishness, and their relentless refusal to surrender to the void. This was the moment the aliens watching from light years away, listening through quantum taps and subspace windows, feared most. Not because they saw destruction, but because they saw truth. They saw a species that had taken chaos and bent it into culture, that had absorbed suffering and somehow created art, that had lost everything over and over, and still dared to imagine tomorrow. No wonder the warship had scared them. It wasn't the size, or the arsenal, or the engine core that could bend time. It was the will. The anomaly, this anti-meaning force that predated the stars, could not fight a will like that. It couldn't predict it, understand it, or override it. The story of humanity was not written in code or equations. It was etched in scars, on bodies, on planets, in the dark corners of minds that refused to give in. The Valiant did not fire a final weapon. There was no last salvo, no climax of explosions. What it offered instead was a simple transmission beam, not through radio, but directly into the structure of space-time. A heartbeat. Slow, steady, unyielding. It echoed across the rift, through the anomaly, and into the galaxies watching from afar. And with it came fragments of lives: a child laughing under a broken sky, a soldier weeping after victory, a scientist lighting a candle on a distant outpost, a poet writing one last verse as their city burned. These were not records. They were evidence, evidence that humans were not merely survivors. They were architects of defiance. The anomaly, so vast, so ancient, did not vanish, but it changed. Its tendrils of void retracted. Its gravity of meaninglessness weakened. For the first time, it encountered something it could not consume, and so it remembered them, not as prey, but as peers. The warship drifted back from the brink, systems humming, core stable, crew unified. Captain Holt, once burdened by command, now felt something else: purpose. He looked out into the black, no longer as a conqueror, but as a custodian. Behind them, the rift sealed, not slammed shut, but folded gently, like the last page of a book being closed. They had not destroyed the darkness, they had taught it to listen. And across the galaxy, civilizations alien and ancient reconsidered everything. They had seen inside the human mind and realized what lay there could not be defeated. In the months that followed, embassies were sent, alliances formed. The name Valiant echoed not as a symbol of war, but of transformation. And on Earth, under skies no longer feared, children were told a new story of a ship, a crew, a moment when the universe scanned a human warship and saw something that terrified even the void: hope.